Welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, The Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops and Detroit Bad Boys, a former D1 Hooper and high school coach, current teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids.
And I'm Omari Sanko for the second, Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
Did you read it off a script this morning, Omari?
Did not read it off of a script. I'm not a script. I'm not a script guy. I need to just say it off memory to get into the groove, because even though we have an outline, we don't have a script. It's a free willing pod, and I want to lead off on the right tone. So I have to not read the script, just train my brain immediately. We're just going for a full hour. We're not reading off anything, none of that. So it bit me a little bit last week, but this is episode 59, and I've gotten 58 good intros, so I will take that ratio. That's pretty good.
I love it. Always, we are blessed to be joined by our producer, Wes Davenport, talking about the outlines. He puts all of them together. He does all of that work for us, lets us know what you guys want to be listening to every week whenever we drop the pod. And next week, Omari, when we record episode 60, neither of us are going to be reading off a script, because we are going to be recording live and in person at the Hopcat Midtown in Detroit, 4265 Woodward. We talked about this last week on the episode. We've been promoting it on social media, dropping it wherever we can. We are extremely excited about this opportunity to record with you guys in the audience. Wes will be walking around taking your questions. It's, like I said, it's the most interactive, engaging, and right now you're going to get an answer to your mailbag question. I'm excited for this, Omari.
Yeah, and it times perfectly with the Pistons being almost done with their season at that point. And it'll be fun. I've never done anything like that. I don't know if you have. So it'll be a different experience for both of us, but we've gotten good feedback already. We should have a good crowd. If you're on the fence about going, I promise you it'll be a good time. The food at Hopcat's pretty good. There'll be some good people there. And we're excited to meet some of our listeners. We hear from you all on the email and the comments on Detroit Bad Boys, on Twitter, pretty much everywhere, but I've not had a chance to meet many of you in person. So, if you're interested in going, 8 p.m. next Monday, me and Bryce West will be there chopping it up. It'll be a good time.
That's what this was really about. I'd come to Detroit once, twice a year as much as I can. And I do that. Yes, I want to see the Pistons in person and do all that stuff, but I want to meet people in person. I've only got to hang out with you, 3 or 4 times in person. Me and Wes just a couple of times. Once, actually, I think Wes, just once in person. And so it's you talking about you and Wes and his dad and all that, being able to sit down for supper. That's what this is about. It's a chance for us to meet our listeners, meet other people that are around the podcast. So again, 8 p.m. Eastern, the Hopcat Detroit in Midtown on Woodward. 8 o'clock. We will be there beforehand if you want to come down, eat, hang out. And then we're going to stay around after and watch the national championship game. It starts at 9 p.m. Late start, but it starts at 9. So we'll record. We'll do that. We'll answer all your questions. And then we'll just hang out, watch some hoops. A really exciting national championship game, as we will talk about March Madness here later in the episode. But to start, Omari, we're going to talk about our Detroit Pistons and the rookies. Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, this Rookie of the Year race, this first team all-rookie, second. It's been a really good rookie class, Omari. But let's start with the Pistons rookie. Let's start with Jaden Ivey. We talked about him a lot. How do you feel now that we're towards the end of the season about Jaden Ivey's rookie year?
Overall, it's been, to be a successful rookie year when you look at what he had to work on coming out of Purdue, what he was already good at, and the player he's been for the Pistons this season. And I actually wrote about it when online Saturday on Freak.com. I believe it's in print today. If not, it's still online. I actually never know it's in our print product because I don't, I only pick it up when I'm in the office or whatnot. But I need to check online because I can see my name in there. With that aside, he's improved a lot as a playmaker. And I think that's one thing that stood out pretty much since the beginning of the season, where even when the turnovers were higher and maybe the assists weren't where you quite wanted them to be, you could just see how with his speed and ability to get downhill, he could just make things happen naturally that a lot of ball handlers struggle with. Kate, Killian don't necessarily have that innate, I could just take one step and the entire defense is scrambling, figuring out what to do. And we see Ivy create those moments 2 or 3 times a game. And he's having his best month as a passer right now, averaging over 6 assists a game. Before that 9 turnover game against the Raptors last week, it was almost a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. I know a lot of people didn't watch that game with March Madness being on, and they lost by 30 points. He didn't miss a whole lot. But besides that game, Ivy has been a pretty good point guard, and I think for him to be at this point by the end of his rookie season is in a lot of ways, I think a best case scenario as far as just his growth at the ball in his hands.
He was efficient from the field in that game, though, Omari. So, like, there was a silver lining that he did shoot the ball well. Here's what I think is interesting, Omari, and we're going to talk about draft prospects more on this episode and a bunch moving forward, right? I think a lot of times we talk about elite level this or that with these prospects. They're going to come into the NBA. They're going to be elite at this. What is their skill? And with Jaden Ivey, I was a little bit slow to call him an elite level, straight line, speed, first step athlete, but he is. Like from day one, and you were the one that I feel like used to tell me this, he's going to have an elite level first step. He's got elite level speed. And I just wasn't sure because, NBA athletes are the best of the best in the world, Omar. He is an elite level at the NBA level, first step, getting downhill, getting into the lane. And that just right there opens up so much other stuff for him. So that was probably the thing I've been most encouraged by is his elite skill has translated to be elite in the NBA.
There are some skills that don't necessarily translate to the NBA immediately and some that do. And I think just a guy who can just take one step and immediately get going, that's a pretty great skill to have, and that's a lot of athletic ball handlers. It's one thing to be able to jump or like whatever, but not all guys get off of one step that fast. Like you have guys who are great athletes, don't necessarily have the greatest first step, and that's something that limits them as far as just being able to get downhill and score at the rim. With Ivy, that's been there from day one, and actually for him, I think that's translated so well. He often didn't necessarily know what to do, especially early in the season. Once he took that first step, right? It's like, okay, I beat my defender. Now what? And you still see it a little bit now where you've got all this motion happening on the court and it's just trying to sort it all out. And it's just for him, I think him processing the game as fast as he's able to play it. And he's caught up in a lot of ways. I still think he telegraphs a lot of passes and there's still some things he has to work out. But just to have a sustained 2-month stretch where he's averaging about 6 assists per game, he's turning over the ball half as often as that. To me, gives him a pretty good floor and a good baseline to build off of for next season where it's like, okay, I still have a lot I have to figure out, but I can be a productive playmaker even with all this growth still in front of me. And that's pretty much what's important for him. And my favorite thing about his first step was that I think some things are going to come easier for him as well, just because he doesn't have to do much to create space. Like he's not going to get lost in the trees as much. It's just things that's going to, because of that first step, it's just, okay, either find figure out what the low man's doing, dump it out underneath, or pull up for a midi, get all the way to the rim, kick it out. Like, I think his decision tree is a little bit simpler than it is for a lot of guys because of that quickness he has.
Well, he doesn't have to expend as much energy, right? Whether physical energy or mental energy, emotion, whatever. Like that's a part of the game. If you're out there and you have to do all these dribble moves just to get by the initial defender, well, now you've expended a bunch of energy already. I mean, that's why the ball screen has become so prevalent in the NBA. It's because it's an easier way to create an advantage than necessarily in isolation. Well, he has this isolation type skill where he can go by someone relatively easy, and then now he can expend that energy physically, mentally, emotionally, once he gets into the lane. And I think it's been way better than I thought in terms of what he's done in the mid-range. I've talked about that. He's been so much better there. You mentioned the floor right there. So I want to ask you this. We took a little bit early in the season with our predictions with his stat line. Obviously, we were too low based on where it's going to end. What is your ceiling for Jaden Ivey now that you have seen him for 70 games, all these minutes, most of them without Cade Cunningham? We'll talk about that in just a second. Is his ceiling still kind of the same? Is it raised? Is it lowered? Is it all NBA? Is it all-star? What's your kind of ceiling for Jaden Ivey now that we've seen him for all these minutes in his rookie season?
I still see a perennial all-star ceiling for him. And I think the thing that it doesn't worry me, but he's in that stage where it's like, okay, I've shown that I could be a playmaker, but he's still putting the rest of his game together. As good as his playmaking has been in March, he's also having his worst month shooting and scoring the ball. And whether that's just him hitting a late season rookie wall, like wear and tear, or something bigger, like he hasn't been as bad as he's been this month. Like he's like sub 40%, like sub 35 from 3 this month. Like he's not going to be that bad ever. But I think it's just him still putting together a complete month. And he still has a lot of growth ahead of him as far as just some of the smaller details of the game that will get him from pretty good to great. The shooting's been better than we both expected. He can still make strides as far as that. He still has playmaking nice where he has 7, 8, 9 turnovers, which he could reduce that down a good bit. And even and as good as he's been at getting downhill, I would say that the percentage at the rim probably hasn't been quite as good as you would want to see as well. And some of that is, I still think, okay, I can get downhill, but what do I do after? He's not always taking the greatest quality shots at the rim. And there are probably times where he could still draw contact more than he does now, and he's already pretty good at it. So there's still a lot he has to iron out. And I think with a good offseason of work ahead of him, he could iron out a lot of this stuff and come back even stronger next year.
I think sometimes he predetermines what he's going to do. You know, if he misses a few shots in the next drive, he's like, nope, I'm not shooting this one. I'm going to pass this one. Or I've passed it 3 times. Now the defense is definitely going to play me to pass, so I'm going to go score. And when you're predetermining, then the defense does something completely different than you expect. And all of a sudden you're changing on the fly. And so I do think that that's part of it. But you mentioned the scoring efficiency. I wonder if part of that is because he's taken such a load as the ball handler, the primary creator. And while he has done a good job, an admirable job, better than what I would have expected as the lead primary creator and ball handler, I can't help but wonder, what do you see as his fit next to Cade Cunningham now? Has this changed your mind, what we've seen from him as this lead creator? Because coming into the season, I was making this pitch over and over and over. Jaden Ivey can play off ball. He's not necessarily a point guard. He can play off ball. You can run him off screens. He can be the secondary creator. Again, I always reference the first play of Summer League where they ran him off an off-ball action, curled into the lane. He throws the lob to Jalen Duren. I still believe that. I just think now there's more staggering of minutes where he can play as the initiator when Cade is off the floor. So do you have any more, I guess, confidence in the Cade and Ivy backcourt? Is it less? Do you think like, oh man, he needs the ball and Cade's going to have to play more off the ball? Where are you at with that combination now that we've seen Jaden?
I think I'm higher on it now than I was at the beginning of the season. And I will also add that Ivy's kind of had his worst month as a scorer while the Pistons are probably not putting their best roster on the floor, right? Like he's not playing off of ground, he's not playing off of Burks.
That is a very nice way of saying that, Omari.
You know, that's like that sounds harsh, but they're at the end of the season where they're getting looks at guys who, you know, either have decisions coming up or whatnot, and and Kane's been out for the year, but also Boyan Burks, like all these guys who would probably make life a little bit easier for Ivy. He's had to take on an even bigger role than he's had to normally. So not to insult any of the guys playing, I didn't mean it that way, but he's not playing with, players who necessarily make his lives easier. He's trying to figure things out with, guys who came at the end of the season. You haven't developed that chemistry. They were on 10-day contracts, yada, yada. So he's not. So I think Ivy's role is probably different than it was at the beginning. But back to your question about Cade Cunningham, I would say I feel better about it. I feel better about him being able to play off of another lead ball handler who will make his life easier, because I don't think his life has been that easy this season, because he's coming to a situation where really a lot of why the Pistons were viewed as a good landing spot for him is because of Cade Cunningham. A lot of people realize that, okay, he's going to struggle making decisions with the ball at times. So to put him next to a guy who's going to command that much attention, that can run the offense proficiently and take that pressure off of him would be a good situation. And the stuff he's doing now has been without Cade. Cade hasn't played since like early mid-November. So Ivy's been in the crosshairs every single night as far as the defensive game plan, as far as teams being able to crowd him. The other one, when he tries to get into the lane, make him uncomfortable. He's been uncomfortable all season. He's done a lot of good stuff despite that. So I think when Cade comes back and you have a player next to him who in a lot of ways is a really good compliment, right? Like Cade's not the burstiest athlete, but he's probably a better shooter. He's bigger. He can take on the tougher defensive assignment. And also just a bucket, right? I mean, Cade, you can put the ball in his hands and just trust that he's going to find a way to produce a bucket, whether it's something with himself or setting somebody else up. He did a lot his rookie year. He's going to do that when he comes back from that calf surgery. And there's still a lot of unknown just because we only saw them play together for 11 or 12 games before Cade went down. But I do think that that backcourt has a chance to be one of the more dynamic backcourts in the East next season. Just assuming that one of those guys could shoot the ball pretty well. I think Cade will be able to shoot it pretty well. I think Ivy still has some work to do, but one of those guys will have to shoot it, I think, for that pairing to work.
I think if they both shoot 35, it's going to be okay. We've seen it with Ivy. He's really good in catch and shoot, especially unguarded, which, you expect people to be. But as long as he can make those, if he can knock those down, Zamari, then it forces people to close out, and now he can use that first step. I think Cade's going to shoot it better. I really wonder if the shin stuff was affecting the three-point shot. We saw him be good from the mid-range. And so I think it'll work. I think there'll be enough floor spacing. And I don't think you were being harsh, Amar. At the end of the day, we can love Eugene Amarui. I don't think anybody thinks he's an NBA starter. So Ivy has been going out onto the floor every night with guys that aren't really, who are the starters on this roster? Who are real quality NBA starters? Cade, Boyan, and maybe that's it. Those guys haven't been playing. Like, I love Rodney Magruder. I talk about it all the time. I love Rodney Magruder, but Rodney Magruder's not an NBA level starter, and they're playing against teams that are like jockeying for position in the playoffs. So that does have to play into the efficiency. Let's talk about the Rookie of the Year race in general, though, Omari, because here's what I'm going to say to start us off. I think there's a chance. I told this to Wes yesterday, so he's smirking in the background. I think there's a chance Pistons fans are really, really disappointed whenever all rookie teams come out. I think there's a real chance that Jaden Ivey does not make first team and makes second team, and that Jalen Duren doesn't make a team at all. I don't think Jaden Ivey's in play for Rookie of the Year at all. I'm not saying I agree with it. This isn't what I'm saying I would do. I just think there's a real chance of this. So I'm going to go through the 6 guys who I think have a chance for first team. If you want to add somebody in, you can. Paolo Banchero, Jalen Williams, wing Jalen Williams as they call it, since there's 2 on that team. Benedict Mathurin, that's a really interesting conversation with him. Walker Kessler, Jaden Ivey, Keegan Murray. Those are the 6 first-team guys, and any guys you could maybe talk about Rookie of the Year. Where do you kind of rank those guys? Who's your Rookie of the Year, and what are the 5 of the 6 that make first team?
So this rookie class is unique in the sense that it's not only deep, but I think the parity at the top has been very even. And I think Paolo Banchero is going to be a shoo-in for Rookie of the Year. I don't think that there's going to be any contention as far as that. Although maybe there should be more than there currently is, because he started off hot. And I think counting stats-wise, he's been the best. But when you kind of look at the numbers and the efficiency, and I know he's playing for an Orlando Magic team, and I would never argue that should count against him, kind of with Cade or Ivy or any others. You guys, you're the number 1 pick. You're not going to play for a great team. You're a top 5 pick. You're not going to play for a great team. But I think sort of like that torrid start that he had at the beginning of the year, after a certain point, tailed off a little bit. And you compare it to some of the other top rookies, and he's still Rookie of the Year. I just don't think that it's probably as big of a no-brainer as it's been talked about. Like, I do think there are guys who have closed that gap. But if I had a vote, and I actually do think I will have a vote.
I was wondering about this yesterday. Is it your turn? Because this rotates between the beat writers, right? So it'd be between you, James, and Mike now? Is that how it works? Every year a different one of you gets a vote?
Yeah. So this year it's me. So I had an all-star vote. And if I do have a ballot for the overall race, it'll probably hit sometime this week. But I think Banchero, to average, 26 and 4 over the course of a year. Didn't shoot it very well, but the overall efficiency is good. That's hard to top. But then after him, you have this sort of muck of guys who I think you could all make first-team arguments for. And between Jalen Williams, Benedict Mathurin, Walker Kessler, Jaden Ivey, and Keegan Murray, I would honestly say Walker Kessler might be number 2 in that group, simply because to be a productive rim protector as a rookie, and also be a really strong rebounder, like a really efficient scorer, and just all the stuff he's done. I think it's really hard to do that as a rookie. So he's played for a pretty good Utah Jazz team, obviously, and any rookie who's in a system that is playing around 500 basketball is probably going to have an easier job than a team who is like in the running to get another number 1 pick. But even with that, I still think Walker Kessler's probably been the second best rookie in this class, which Jalen Williams, he's been absolutely fantastic. Ivy, we talked about him. He's been good. Keegan Murray has also been good. So picking between, and Benedict Mathurin, your guy out of Indiana. So those 4 guys for 3 more spots is tough. That's really tough. Somebody's going to get snubbed, unfortunately.
That's what I'm saying, Omari. So here, I want to talk about Paolo Banchero. Paolo, post All-Star break numbers are actually better than his overall season. Mm-hmm. And so there is like this narrative, and I think there's some truth to it. He did go through a rough stretch, but post All-Star break, he's averaging 0.3 more points, same rebounds, more assists, and he's actually shooting better. 45, 31, 72 shooting split. So I guess he's down a little bit on his free throw percentage, but it's not like, I think he went through a 3-point stretch in maybe February, 1 month where it was really, really bad, but essentially it's come back to earth. I think Paolo still wins it. I think 2 and 3 hands down are Jalen Williams and Walker Kessler. I was not high at all on Walker Kessler coming into the draft, Omari. Like, I will parade my makes and what I got right, and I will keep my own receipts. Walker Kessler is a receipt that I definitely need to own because I was not high on him. I thought he just chased blocks. I didn't know that he was a true rim protector. He's been really good. I think he had a huge night on Saturday night. I think it comes down to, actually, to me, I think it comes down to 3 guys for 2 spots: Benedict Mathurin, Jaden Ivey, Keegan Murray. And I have some real nervousness that Jaden's going to get left off of that because Benedict Mathurin had such a strong start. Now, it hasn't been good post All-Star break for Benedict Mathurin. He's down almost 5 points per game. But Keegan Murray's probably going to set the NBA rookie record for three-point makes. And the Kings are a really good story. I think they're number 3 in the West. I just don't think that they're going to leave him off. So I'm nervous here. I think there's a real world where Jaden Ivey doesn't make first team all-rookie.
Yeah, I think there is too. And I think it's tough because Keegan has been fantastic. He shot the ball really well. Efficiency-wise, he's in a different stratosphere compared to
yes.
Ivy and also Benedict Mathurin.
Essentially everybody. I mean,
yeah,
with
essentially everybody. And, and some of that, and I think this is where the debate gets tough because it's like, okay, well, he is playing for the best Kings team in 20 years, and he's got Sabonis and De'Aaron Fox, 2 all-star caliber guys. And I think his job is so much easier compared to pretty much anyone else drafted in like that top 7 or 8, where it's like if he came out of college, he's 23 years old, obviously very, very polished and, more physically mature, mentally mature than a lot of guys in that class. And you put him on a playoff team, I think you would expect him to find his footing immediately in a way that a player like a Ben Math or an Ivy, it will probably take them a little bit more time to get their footing, just being on teams that are still in various stages of a rebuild. And I would argue that of any player in that range, I think Ivy's probably had the hardest job because he came into a situation that's supposed to make things a little bit easier. And then Cade Cunningham got hurt. So he is essentially on an island all season, playing, like you saw, some stability with Boyan and, some guys who could make his life easier. But I think he's probably had the hardest job. And for him to still pass the ball as well as he's had, his efficiency's kind of fluctuated up and down a year. Unfortunately, this cold March might be what does him in because he's having his worst month efficiency-wise. It's tough. I mean, I agree. I do think there's a real world where Ivy does not crack the first team. And yeah, it's just unfortunate for him because I do think he's had a first-team all-rookie worthy season. He's been the best passer and playmaker of his class. The rookie has more assists. You see the progression from start to finish where he has rounded out his game. So I don't want to say it's unfair. Like, I think all these awards are unfair now because the NBA is so deep that you're looking at snubs for every single category, no matter what category it is. But yeah, I mean, I think Ivy is probably between him and Ben Math being cut out of that second team. And Mathurin's been good too. He's also been better post All-Star break efficiency-wise, even if his overall scoring has been down. So it's going to be tough. I'm curious to see how this voting works out over the next few weeks.
For the record, I would have Jaden Ivey over both of those guys. So I think my rookie ranking would be Paolo, Jalen, Williams, Walker Kessler, and then I would actually go Jaden Ivey number 4 over Ben Math and Keegan Murray, just because I do think it's been such a hard road for him. Because, yeah, you look at these other guys. Paolo's playing with Franz and a decent roster. Jalen Williams. SGA is a top 10 player in the NBA. Jalen Williams is playing off of him. Benedict Mathurin's playing off Halliburton. You outlined it with Keegan Murray, the guys he gets to play off of. And I think what Ivy has done, even the box score numbers, he's averaging 6.5 assists post All-Star break. So for the record, for the listeners, I just wanted to put out there, I think there's a real chance. I think there's a real world where he doesn't make first team, but I personally would definitely have him first team. Let's then talk about the second team a little bit here, Omari. So you got to take one of those guys, and you're already putting them on the second team. So there's already just 4 spots left on second team. And let me read off the names. Jabari Smith Jr., been really good post All-Star break. Jeremy Sohan, averaging almost 17 points and 7 rebounds post All-Star break. Of course, Jalen Duren. Shaedon Sharpe just now comes into the conversation. Andrew Nebhard, who's been really good. Tari Eason, Malachi Branham, AJ Griffin down with the Hawks. And that doesn't even include guys like Mark Williams, David Roddy, Ochai Agbaji, Jaden Hardy, who I think is going to be really good. That was a win for me in the draft. And Dyson Daniels. Like, it's insane. There's going to be a lot of snubs on this second team as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think second team is going to be more brutal than the first team, because you're going to have guys first or second who are clearly going to be honored in some way. Like if Keegan doesn't make the cut for first team, he's clearly a second team guy. But then you have like 6, 7 guys after that who are all basically on equal footing, right? So you have Jeremy Sohan, who has been pretty phenomenal. I think post All-Star break, his scoring is going way up, 17 a game, rebounding, he's passing the ball well. Overall efficiency is pretty good, even though his 3-point shot still hasn't come along. But he has been a deserving second-team guy. Let's talk about our guy Jalen Duren here, right, who I think has exceeded expectations all year. from start to finish. He's improved in some ways. Like some of the passes he throws just intuitively are just like, man, like his ability to be a connector already at 19, I think is pretty impressive. And I look at this list, like Andrew Nembhard, he's been a really, really good, first, second / third point guard for the Pacers all season, wherever they need to fill in, whether he's filling in for Halliburton or playing next to him. He's been really good. Tari Eason, Shaedon Sharp, Malachi Branham, who was really good post All-Star break. It's going to be a bloodbath, but I will make a case for Jalen Duren for why he shouldn't be lost in the shuffle here. And for me, it just comes down to the fact that he has been a productive starter as the youngest player in the NBA for a team that positioned itself coming into the season to not have to rely on him. Like, he's been so good that the Pistons were like, oh, okay, we just signed Marvin Bagley to a 3-year deal. And it's like, this guy's so good that we can't leave him on the bench. Like, we have to play him. Like, the fact that he forced Detroit's hand and has been one of their most productive players. And even as raw as he is now, and you just see how much better he can become, I think it would really be a shame if he didn't get some type of honor for these rookie lists, because I do think he is clearly deserving for a second team spot. Like, that first team is tough, but he should land on an all-rookie team by the end of the season. I think he's earned that. I think even looking at the field, he has done enough to warrant that.
All right, we're going to continue this conversation because it's too good. This is going to carry over into the second segment, but that's okay. We're going to come back to this because there's just so many guys to talk about. We'll start off segment 2 with this, and then we'll get into some more NBA draft stuff, some of our favorite prospects in March Madness a little bit later in the episode. But we'll come back with Jalen Duren in the second team all-rookie debate after this short break.
All right, we're back with segment 2, and I dug out my spots on Jalen Duren and why I think he's deserving for that second team all-rookie spot. Bryce, I feel like your thoughts are probably not that dissimilar, but I'm curious to hear how you feel about that aspect of the race, because I know some of your favorite guys in the entire draft are in this mix as well.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's the same thing as with the first team. Well, I would have Jaden Ivey on first team all rookie. I would have Jalen Duren second team all rookie. But again, let's just say it's Keegan Murray. Keegan Murray, leads the second team all. I think Jabari Smith Jr. is going to make it. That's 2 guys. I think Jeremy Sohan's probably going to make it. That's 3 guys. I think Shaedon Sharp probably makes it. That's 4 guys. And now you still have this list. We don't have to keep naming everybody off. I think Duren probably gets in, but would it shock you if they gave it to Andrew Nembhard because the Pacers have won more games? And again, I agree. I don't think this should have anything to do with wins and losses, but we know it became part of the argument last year with the overall Rookie of the Year race. And I just wonder, with all of these good rookies and some of them playing on decent teams, now obviously some of them aren't, the San Antonio Spurs aren't any good. The Houston Rockets aren't any good. Even Shaedon Sharp with the Blazers have underperformed or haven't met expectations at least. But are you going to put 2 Detroit Pistons players on the all rookie teams whenever they're the worst team in the NBA record-wise? And I just think we need to prepare ourselves, us fans, to see Jaden Ivey on second team and Jalen Duren not get rewarded. And to your point, I think that would be a shame for the season that Ivey has had and the expectations he has exceeded, and for the season Duren has had and he exceeding expectations maybe even more. It would be a shame for those guys not to get first and second team. I think they should. I just think there's a real world where they don't.
I think it would also kind of highlight maybe the inherent difficulty of voting as a media member. And,
yes.
This includes me as well, because when you are tasked with covering one team, I cover 82 Pistons games a year, and it's just a lot of guys who have various levels of exposure depending on the team that they play on. And I can say right now that I know a lot of media members have not watched the Pistons game this season outside of the game that their teams played them in. And I think sometimes, players on bad teams, that could be a problem, right? As we saw last year, that a lot of voters were iffy about voting for Cade Cunningham because he was putting up numbers for a bad team. Scotty Barnes played for a good Raptors team, and all those guys were deserving first team. But you saw when it came down to Rookie of the Year debate, a lot of people valued that Scotty Barnes and Evan Mobley were good players for good teams, and Cade Cunningham was not, and that was a big factor in that race. Whether that's right or wrong is a matter of personal opinion, but I do think that Ivey and Duren playing for the worst team in the league, that a lot of beat writers, have not watched them. Not myself as a beat writer, guys I have not watched a lot of. It just comes down to looking at the numbers and, maybe some highlight clips here and there. But that could work against Ivey and Duren when it's all said and done. And that's something that is, I know people are going to be pissed about it on, Twitter when they see our guys got penalized playing for a bad team, yada, yada. We'll have to see. We'll just have to see. But I do think that they've done enough to earn those spots.
One thing that I do think plays in both of their favors is they're at the top of the list in a couple counting stats. So Jaden Ivey with his assists and with his points, he's towards the top of the list. And then Jalen Duren with his rebounding is one of the best rookie rebounders in the league, and then especially offensive rebounding. So I think because of what you said, where that these guys aren't able to watch every game, there are some numbers and stats that really like these guys. So even the NBA.com PIE player impact estimate, Jalen Duren is an 11.4, which is actually second out of all of these guys other than Walker Kessler. So there is probably some metrics. There's so many all-encompassing metrics out there that you can use. I wasn't going to look up all of them, but I do think that there's some numbers, at least, if these guys aren't able to watch film on all the rookies, which they can't, that do play into Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duren possibly making these teams and give them a leg up. So I do think, because that's one thing that hurt Cade last year, quite honestly, Omari. There was a lot of metrics that talked about his efficiency and how quote-unquote bad it was. And so I do think that hurt his case a little bit as well. Now, obviously, that was team context and everything also. But I do think that that's one thing they have in their favor. So anything else with these all-rookie teams, rookie of the year, second team, or Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duren specifically, before we move a little bit more into the NBA draft?
Yeah, I just think it's going to be – I think that this race will really kind of highlight how voters make these tough decisions. And we may or may not see a bias toward guys who perform for good teams. Kind of going back to that first team race, one thing that kind of factors in for B is that when you look at just shot attempts per game,
yes, for
this rookie class, Keegan Murray's seventh. So he's still pretty high, but his role also has been smaller than a lot of those top picks, right? Where you're the fourth pick and you're essentially the fourth or fifth option. For this team, you're being compared to a lot of guys who are top options. I just think it's a really interesting and fascinating debate. There's no really right or wrong answer to it, right? I mean, if you're playing your role perfectly as a rookie for a good team, you should be rewarded for that. I'm not going to say Keegan Murray doesn't deserve to be first team because he's playing for the Sacramento Kings. You can't control where you go. You just have to make the most of it. I just think as we get deeper into these debates, and you almost have to pick bits a little bit on which guys are deserving and which ones aren't. We're going to see that for the MVP race. I mean, you could make very clean, strong arguments for Jokic, Embiid, Giannis, whoever else. You want to argue for Luka, which they may miss the playoffs, maybe not now, but there's a point in the season where you can make a very strong argument for him. And I think numbers-wise, he still belongs to the debate regardless of his team. I mean, we're at the point now with all these races, I feel like we're just picking bits and, finding reasons to separate guys. And it's just more so the fact that there's only a handful of guys who can get these awards, right? So, yeah, Pistons fans might be disappointed. We will see. And I think we're probably on the same page where they have done enough to warrant spots on both of those teams.
Detroit versus everybody, baby. Let's move into the lottery odds. Just a quick update here. The Pistons still have the worst record in the NBA by a couple games. I believe they're about to lock up a bottom three finish. I know that's not necessarily a positive thing, but Charlotte has won enough games. The Pistons have lost enough games. It's between Detroit, Houston, and San Antonio for the bottom three seeds. We broke this all down last episode in terms of the 1, 2, 3, or 4. It doesn't matter whether you're one of the worst record, the second worst, or third worst record. The odds are the same. It really just changes how far you can fall, whether it's 5th, 6th, or 7th. Omari, I just want to ask you this. Where do you think the Pistons end up in terms of, I'm not going to ask you to predict the lottery odds, but do you think they end up with the worst record in the NBA here in a couple weeks whenever the season is over?
Yeah, I think they end up with the worst record. Just rotation-wise, I don't think they're going to get any guys back who will help them win a little bit more. They have lost, I think, either 16 of their last 17 or 15 of their last 16. I'm losing count, but it's been a lot of losing over the last 2 months or so. And they are currently, I think, 2 games behind Houston for the worst record.
It's either 2 or 2.5, I think, yeah.
Yeah, you've got 7 games left. At this point, you're probably the worst team in the NBA. You may not even crack 20 wins at this point, right? You'd have to win more than you lose over the next, 2 weeks or so. And I don't know if that's going to happen. So for all intents and purposes, I think we could assume that the Pistons are guaranteed a top 5 pick in this year's draft.
Yeah, that's what I think it comes down to. Then If you're looking specifically just to the NBA draft, I think that's a good spot to be in. If they fell to 6, they fell to 7, it would kind of, for me, it depend on how the draft falls. If they're in the top 5, I'm going to feel pretty decent. Now, there's levels of how I feel about where, obviously if you're 1 and you get Victor, that's completely different than if you're 4 and end up with a Min Thompson. But if they're in the top 5, I'm feeling pretty good with what they can walk away from. You get below that and it starts to get a little more concerning. Before we start talking actual prospects and some of our favorites and some of that stuff, I just want to ask this. This was a really good question Wes put in the outline. Is it concerning to you that they're the worst team in basketball this season? Like, is there something culturally wrong, culturally concerning? Do you have some overwhelming issue with the fact that they are the worst team in the NBA this season?
No, I don't, because I think coming into the year one, I think me and you and other people who covered the team were aligned in the sense that this probably wasn't going to be the leap forward that people wanted to see. I did not see them making the playoffs, and I thought it was probably pretty clear that they're going to be a bottom 3 team in the East again. Did I expect fewer than 20 wins? No, but I would say just on paper, looking at where they are in the standings how this season is shaken out, I don't think that it's necessarily that shocking. Like, I didn't see them making the playoffs with Cade, so without Cade, obviously they're going to be a step below that, and that's where it's been. So that does not concern me. I think on paper, you can look at this season and you can say they were worse than they were during Troy Weaver's first 2 years. How does that happen? It means something clearly went wrong in the rebuild. And it's like, well, yeah, Cade got hurt, so that's what went wrong. It's, I don't necessarily see that as an indictment on what they've built so far. And people may disagree with this. For me personally, I just don't think there's a massive, massive difference between like a 21 season or like a 28-win season. It's like, you're a bad team, right? Like, to me, it's more so about individual growth for players, like how you see guys fitting in the rows down the road, and if that talent base is good enough to make a leap the following season. And just from what we've seen from Duren, from Ivey, what we've already seen from Cade, and then the draft pick and the cap space coming up, I still think that they can turn this around pretty quickly. So that doesn't worry me too much.
I'm the same. I do think it puts a little pressure. You got to win some games next year, Omari. I don't think we can have another season like this where it's 15, less than 20 wins. Now, all of this is, predicated on people staying healthy. If Cade's hurt and somebody else was hurt and, none of these guys are healthy, that's a little bit different. But if Cade is back and healthy, obviously you return all the other young guys, a top 5 pick, all of that, cap space, depending on what they do with it. And you don't, I'm not saying even play in. I think it's crazy to talk about whether they should be in the play-in next year or not. We don't even know what the roster is going to look like. They have $40-50 million in cap space. Who knows how maybe they take on a SIN contract for future assets. Maybe they use it for a real quality player. And that's something we'll talk about here over the next month or two as we talk about the actual offseason and some different strategies. I had somebody throw one out to me the other day that was really interesting, but we'll save that for later. Let's talk some actual names and prospects in the draft now, Omari. Top 3 favorite, and I don't know if we'll get to all of them, but just our favorite prospects for the Pistons. It doesn't have to be the best 3 players. We know who the players at the top are, who some of the best players are, but who are some of the guys you're like, man, that guy would be really fun to see on the Pistons. And so I am going to start at the top. I do think Brandon Miller is a perfect fit for this Detroit team. Obviously, Victor is a perfect fit because Victor is generational. But to me, you have 3 guys that I would lock in kind of as starters long-term. And I'm going to exclude Boyan because I said long-term. Jaden Ivey in the backcourt. And then I think Jalen Duren is still the center. And I guess if it's not Duren, it's Wiseman. But I think it's Duren. I think Duren starts next year and is the center of the – so that leaves the 3 spot and the 4 spot. And so I think Brandon Miller, out of all of these guys, is just the perfect fit in terms of how he can shoot and score and all of those things. So in that sense, he is one of my favorite prospects for the Detroit Pistons.
I think we're aligned in that sense. Like, we don't have to talk about Vic at all. Like, we know he's the generational guy, so nothing to talk about there. Out of every non-Vic prospect, I think Brandon Miller is the best fit for his team as far as what they need. He fits like a glove. Being a guy who's an elite shooter, can put the ball on the floor. And I think he's a better passer than his assists show. Like,
yes.
You see just the way he's able to read and process the game. He's not the most athletic guy either, but he keeps his head up. He can whip passes to the corner. He's just a really good overall basketball player. And like, to me, you draft Brandon Miller, like, you're probably set. Like, you've checked every box you could check through like this 3-year, 4-year draft process. And he raises your offensive ceiling. He gives you a player who fits in perfectly with Cade, Ivey, Duren, all these guys. And I mean, we're completely aligned there. I would name a guy who probably will not be a Piston based on them
Can
having the
I
top five
add
pick.
one thing before you move on?
Sure.
Yeah, I was just saying, his live dribble passing was pretty good, Omari.
Yeah.
Even in these games where he was not efficient. I know what people are going to throw at us. The last 4 games, he shot 21%. I get it. And it is in the big moment. I understand. Like, we can't just throw that away. And we'll have those conversations. But he also rebounds the ball pretty well. He does do a little bit more than just score the basketball.
Absolutely. So here's a guy that I don't know how much we'll talk about him. Depends on get a top 5 pick. I don't know if he's a top 5 pick in this draft. But if you're talking about this class of guards, and if you don't get Scoot, and you still look at that backcourt, and you're like, maybe we need a little something extra. I think the idea of Nick Smith with this team is really fun. I would say he had a bad tournament. He did not have a great rookie season as a whole. He had a knee injury that limited him, and I know teams will do their homework after the draft as far as how much did that knee injury limit him, and could he tap into more of the playmaking and shot making that made him one of the top guys out of his recruiting class. But I will say I think the idea of Nick Smith is a really ideal fit with Cade and Ivy, being a player who you can put the ball in his hands, he can make things happen. But off ball, what he could do as a catch and shoot player, as a cutter, as just a really active defender. Like, I think defensively he has the tools. He's like 6'5", he has the tools to be really good defensively. And if you bring him off of the bench and you have 2 guys who need the ball and he could just cut, knock down open threes, he kind of reminds me of CJ McCollum in some ways.
Okay, I like it.
I like the idea of Nick Smith. Like, let's say somehow they end up with the 3rd best odds. They fall all the way down to 7. And now those top 3 prospects are minutes off the board, looking at like the Cam Whitmore, Anthony Black, tier.
Jet Howard, like legit,
Jet
that's
Howard.
who you're talking about. Taylor Hendricks, this isn't crazy if they fall to that.
Like, I like the idea of Nick Smith with this team. I don't know if he's like the best possible pick you could make in that range, but I think his skills complement being with 2 other guys who can just really dominate the attention of defenses, and he can kind of pick those holes apart.
I will say this. I love Nick Smith coming into the NCAA season. I loved him. I was huge on him coming out of high school. He didn't have the college season I was hoping. He ended it really, really poorly, and that has given me some pause, and he's fallen down my personal board. But I do agree with everything you say. I don't think he can be a top 5 guy because I do think someone like Cam Whitmore fits better. We can talk about Jarris Walker, but I do think if they would happen to fall a little bit lower, or here's the other thing, and the guy I want to bring up next falls into this category. If they get another 1st-round pick, Omari, that's where he could come into play. If he falls in the late lottery or middle of the 1st round, then somebody like Nick Smith makes a lot of sense. Let's continue to dive into this, and we'll talk a little bit of the March Madness from this weekend after this short break.
All right, we're back with segment 3, and I think we're aligned on this guy here, but somebody who has really turned heads in the tournament, and actually wrote last week, like, there's a player in this draft every year who goes like 20, and then 5 years later, it's like, why didn't we let him fall all the way down to 20? And I don't think he's going to fall down to 20 now. Jordan Hawkins. Bryce, lead us off. What is it about Jordan Hawkins that makes him such an enticing fit, not only with the Pistons, but just a prospect in general?
Best shooter in the draft. And I had somebody tweet at me, why is he better than Grady Dick? He's better than Grady Dick because he runs off screens like no player that you have ever watched in college basketball. He's the best shooter in the draft. He can shoot it from anywhere at any time. He gets his feet set. It is a beautiful stroke. And here's the other thing. I've watched pretty much every minute of Jordan Hawkins' sophomore season at UConn, and there is more to his game. I'm telling you, like, he can get to the rim. He is athletic. He can pass. Like, he's not some high-level read guy, but he makes the reads that need to be made, and he's going to compete on the defensive end. Really good off-the-ball defender. Yes, he's skinny and needs to get stronger and all that stuff. Again, I don't think you can take him with the 1st pick the Pistons have, in the top 5. Like, we're not talking about that. But if Troy Weaver wanted, to pull the Jalen Duren trade, get back into the end of the lottery, mid-1st round, I think Jordan Hawkins is an absolute bucket. And for the Pistons, he can come off the bench. What do we always say? Detroit needs shooting, right? Put shooters around these guys, floor spacing. There's nobody better at that than Jordan Hawkins. He is absolutely, no questions, hands down, my favorite player in the 2023 NBA draft.
There are players whose games are custom made for the NBA, and because of college basketball's just college basketballiness. Like, I don't know how to say it, but there's just, you're not playing, like, there are guys whose games pop when they get to the league who pop a little bit in college, but I think just the general chaos of college basketball and teams not being able to put guys in their best position. You may not have the ball handling you need. You may not have just a lot of things in place to kind of make your life easier, right? But you put him with NBA spacing. He's coming off of NBA screen setters, like attacking those gaps. He's got NBA playmaking, got multiple guys who could hit open shooters and just draw defenses away from shooters, which the Pistons have, right? You put Jordan Hawkins on that team. You've got Jalen Duren and, these big guys setting screens, Wiseman. You've got Ivy, you've got Killian, you've got Cade, who could just hit open shooters, get downhill. He would come into the NBA and I could just see him being like a day one, like, oh, wow, this guy is really, really good. And his numbers, I think, do hide some of the passes he can make. Like, he keeps his head up, like he could whip the ball, from side to side, maybe even find like the guy in the dunker spot down low if he's coming downhill. Just his off-ball activity, he's always moving. You can't really fall asleep on him. I know one comparison that has been made for him is Rip Hamilton, which, I know Pistons fans remember the way he was able to come off his screens and just his cardio, man. Like, sometimes he was running every game, just keep defenses to catch defenses off guard. Like, I think Jordan Hawkins has some of that, but instead of the mid-range, is going to be from three. So I think we're relying on him. I think he's going to come into the NBA, and he's going to do some stuff that he wasn't able to show at UConn because his game is built for NBA rosters.
You know what kind of season I think he can have is a Benedict Mathurin with the Pacers. Benedict Mathurin came in. He's been really, really good. I know the production hasn't been quite as – and they aren't the same type of player necessarily, but Benedict Mathurin was a top, 6th pick, but he came off the bench all season for the Pacers, but was just a bucket. Like, at one point, he was 6th man of the year consideration. And so that's the kind of production I think a team is going to get from Jordan Hawkins in year one. And then as he works on his game, he's a great kid and he works really hard. He's going to continue to improve his game, improve his body. I just think you bring a great point with NBAs. Here's what I think about. Watch a Jordan Hawkins game in the Final Four, and they are always attached to this man in the half court. If an NBA team does that, now you're playing 4-on-4. An NBA level talent is going to go expose that. And if an NBA player has to help off because Jaden Ivey is getting downhill, well, now he's knocking down shots. So you're right. I think his game even goes to another level because of the way he shoots it. And defenses can't just key on him because he's the biggest threat on the floor for that UConn team. There was a play in the game on Saturday night where they doubled the big man Sonogo and Jordan Hawkins was on the weak side and the broadcasters were like, oh, that help defender should have been there on the weak side rotating. I'm like, no, he shouldn't, because you're going to leave Jordan Hawkins wide open in the weak side corner. He's going to bang that shot. So that's the level of gravity and spacing he provides. And as you can tell, I love the kid. I think best shooter in the draft, my favorite prospect.
I would say if there's another player maybe in that range that intrigues me, and I just feel like this prospect is so divisive in some ways. You mentioned him earlier. Not in the tournament anymore, but Cam Whitmore, I think, is another player who, on paper, can check a lot of the boxes the Pistons need just as a player who can make things happen on or off the ball as a scorer. Like, you look at this team, and they're clearly set as far as ball handlers, right? Like, you can come out of this draft and find another player who handles the ball and probably feel good. As far as bigs, if it's not Wemby, you probably feel pretty good about passing on this big man class. I like Taylor Hendricks a lot. Like, I think he's another guy who's probably going to pop in a few years, and teams wonder why he went outside the top 10. And he might go inside the top 10.
Yeah, he might.
I think his skill set, probably overlaps a lot with what the Pistons already have. And, I don't know if he makes sense for this team. But I would say Cam Whitmore, who seems to be rising up some draft boards, he's got a lot to his game that I like. I just got to worry about the lack of the auxiliary skills you want to see from a wing, whether it's just the intensity on defense or just him essentially being a black hole with the ball in his hands and no assists, right? But I'm curious to hear where you are as far as him.
Yeah, I've fluctuated with Cam Whitmore. I didn't love him coming out of high school in terms of like a top 5, top 7 prospect. Wes texts me about him all the time, and so I've started to come around. He's forced me to dive deeper into it. Here's what I'll say. I agree with you with the defensive stuff, but when he is engaged, Omari, it's really good. Like, he can be really good. So I think there is potential as this true two-way wing who defends on and off the ball. He has this physical, like, aggressive, athletic presence. And then offensively, I think I buy the shot. I think it's real. And then he's an explosive 2-foot athlete. So he's able to catch, straight line drive. You don't want him making a bunch of dribble moves and then be able to finish around the rim with that explosive athleticism. So I am intrigued. I think he is the consolation prize at number 5, Omari. Like, that's what I say with, as long as the Pistons stay in the top 5, I feel good about the guys they could come away with. We've talked about a lot of them. I'm cool if they come away with Amin Thompson. And then if they fell all the way to 5, or I guess possibly at 4, if Cam Whitmore was the pick at 4 or 5, I would feel good about that. Like, I wouldn't be jumping for joy, but I would be in a place where I'm like, okay, I'm cool with this. This is another nice piece to add. It probably just means that Cade and Ivy have to pop even more and really hit their ceiling.
And I will also say now, and I kind of hit on this last week as well, that Pistons fans should prepare themselves for the possibility of not having a top 3 pick. I mean, just odds-wise, they're more likely to, even with the very best odds, there's like a 60% chance that they end up with like the 4th or 5th pick. And with the last 2 drafts working out favorably for the worst teams, I'll look at this draft with those same odds. There's a good chance a team like a Portland or Indiana or Washington will jump up and grab one of those top 2 or 3 spots, just because the odds, the new lottery odds, are intentionally shaped for that to happen. It won't mean that the Pistons did anything wrong or whatever. I just see a lot of lottery talk about, the rebuild's doomed if the Pistons don't get this pick or whatever. And I just try to avoid that framing altogether. I think, one, there's no such thing as a sure thing as a prospect. You look back at past drafts. I mean, there's a lot of sure things who ended up not panning out, right? And this draft could easily be the same way, where a player who goes after the top 3 ends up being one of the top 3 players in this draft. Happens in every draft. Like, to me, this draft kind of has that, where, okay, you have Victor, you have Wemby, you have Scoot, and then you have sort of this long list of players who are all flawed and, maybe not as exciting for the fan base. But there's a good chance that happens. There's a good chance that we end up with like Chicago being the Wemby winners, and then a team like Orlando, because they don't have enough point guards, apparently, getting like that number 2 spot for Scoot or whoever. Just be prepared for chaos. Be prepared for chaos. Like, I've been saying off Twitter a lot more, but I still see a lot of the same framings as far as how we talk about the lottery and all the frustration when teams don't get the spot that you want them to get. It's a random number generator. The odds are pretty high that they will end up with a Cam Whitmore, a guy outside of that spam. So just prepare yourselves for it now, because this feels like the lottery that's going to have a lot of wackiness happen for some reason. Just a gut feeling for me. It could work out perfectly, so don't let me scare you, but I just feel like something wacky is going to happen.
I will be the positive one today, because my gut is telling me that for the first time, the number 1 odds, the worst record in the NBA, is going to stay at number 1, and Victor Wembanyama is going to be coming to Detroit. I just have a feeling we've put our dues in. It's time for us to cover that, Omari, and just be able to talk about Victor for 2 months and be excited. For real though, I wanted to throw out a couple like 2nd round undrafted free agent guys, possibly even that I feel like Pistons fans would like. So Kevin McCullough Jr. from Kansas, Julian Phillips from Tennessee if he enters, and then Andre Jackson from UConn, teammate of Jordan Hawkins. These are all like defensive wings with some offensive questions, but I do think that that's something that Pistons fans would say, hey, like that sounds like something we need. Kevin McCullough is one of the best off-ball like rotators. He has great hands. Julian Phillips, a really good defender. Andre Jackson, the best athlete of all 3 of them. If you watch a UConn game, he can't really shoot it, but he passes the ball well and he's involved in every single play. So I do think it's important to note the Pistons will also have the top pick of the 2nd round, which isn't just like a throwaway pick. You can get a really good prospect there. So I wanted to throw out those 3 names as like just these defensive wings. They obviously have some offensive shortcomings or they wouldn't be in the 2nd round, but some guys that Pistons fans may want to look into if you're looking to improve the defensive ability of this team on the wing.
I like this draft. I do. It is not, people criticize the talent at the top in the lottery, but I still look at this draft and I feel the same way I do about the past few drafts, where I feel like there's a good 30 guys in here who will have good NBA careers. And like you said, there's a lot of good defensive prospects at the bottom of the draft. That's a guy I like a lot too, Jordan Hawkins. But a lot of 3-4 year guys toward the bottom who could just come in and you feel good about them starting in and becoming genuine NBA guys down the road. I'm curious about this combine process as well, because I just think it's going to be a complete like best once you get outside that top 4 or 5, and you're going to have guys who are like the 20th player on some NBA boards who will be like the 4th or 5th guy on like another team's board. Like, I just think it's going to be complete chaos, and you're going to see a lot of teams essentially just drafting for fit or just taking massive upside swings. Noah Clowney is a guy that I think his range is all over the board right now. A lot of great tools, maybe not the production you want to see. A lot of guys in this draft. We're going to be leaning on Coach Bryce here a lot, to kind of take us through these prospects as we get closer to the lottery over the next couple months or so.
It's crazy because here's the other thing. Even right at the top, like we had the whole Scoop Brandon Miller debate, but then I feel like people are going to be all over the place on the Thompson twins, right? Like nobody knows how to evaluate OTE. We brought on our guy Matt Babcock and he talked us through all that, but at the end of the day, still, we don't all get to go down there and see these guys in person and interview them and talk to them. Like, who knows what to think about those guys? There's always somebody that like comes into the lottery. Here's another one that for Michigan fans, Kobe Buffkin. I truly think Kobe Buffkin's going to be a first-round pick. And I've had a lot of people tweet at me like he shouldn't enter, he should go back. I think Kobe Buffkin is going to be a first-round pick. I'll call it right. I love him. Again, he's one of my favorite guys in the draft. Another one, Imani Bates. I can see Imani Bates literally going into the first round. I can see Imani Bates also going undrafted. The film is all over the place is the best way I can say it. Yeah. I don't know what his role is, Omar. He doesn't play defense on the film anyway. And offensively, it's just like take whatever shot he wants. Well, what NBA team is going to let him just take whatever shots he wants? But he's a tough shot maker. He shoots it well. He's 6'9", 6'10", long, a former top recruit. It's just, there's all these guys. It's all over the place. And the other thing is, some of them may end up going back because the word right now is the 2024 draft isn't that good. So how many of these guys, like at the end of the first round, top of the second, are going to say, nah, I'll go back to school. I'll take my NIL money, which is a real thing and a real like calculation in this process. And then I'll go into the 2024 draft and be a lottery pick.
Yeah, that's the thing too. You may have guys who, they look at their NBA odds and it's like, well, do I want to spend the season grinding in the G League or can I just come back and enjoy another year at college? Yeah, and you mentioned you have a class I see as being pretty weak next year. Those debates are always interesting because on one end it's tough to really declare how good a class is this early in advance. And even after, like sometimes you have a class that looks bad and then you look back and it actually ended up being pretty good. I think the 2013 class probably is just as good as the 2014 draft. And back then it was like the opposite, right? But yeah, just looking ahead at this class, like even just from a Pistons standpoint, I'm also curious to see if they value, enough guys in this draft or some of that top pick to want to make a move for somebody later in the draft. If there's somebody Troy is in love with, I think that they'll go ahead and make that move. But they've also drafted a lot of first round picks over the last couple of years. And, I think this upcoming offseason and this draft in particular will say a lot about where the Pistons' priorities are as far as still being in player development mode, or are we really looking to make a push, get one good guy in, and then invest the rest of those roster spots and resources into players who can help us compete immediately? Because looking later in this draft, like I even look at Kobe Jones, like he's another guy who I like a lot, who could just come in, I think, be a day one contributor and really raise the floor. So we will see just between the overtime elite, the players overseas, and next year's class being weaker and some players may wanting to come back and try their luck again. The next few months, I think, between that combine will be pretty chaotic, and we'll see big boards and mock drafts. We can see some pretty dramatic changes between now and the end of May.
Well, to that point, Omari, coming into this class, it was Victor and Scoot, right? Brandon Miller wasn't the number 3. He wasn't the number 3 guy in his recruiting class, let alone in the 2023 NBA draft class. And so what would we be thinking right now if Brandon Miller wouldn't have had the season he had? It would be a 2-man draft. And then if you don't land in the top 2, oh man, like you're, SOL, like you have a chance at a high level, high ceiling prospect. And now that's changed. And then really, I feel like Amin and Asar probably had a productive quality, like it was a positive season for them with the OTE. So it changes throughout the season, no matter what. Maybe the incoming recruits aren't, really thought to be big time level NBA guys, but who knows what they do in their freshman season. Freshmen will go back and have big sophomore seasons. And that is an interesting point. I wonder about Troy Weaver, even just moving up 5-6 spots to the back end of the first round. I've talked to guys for months now who say like 20 through 40 is just crazy in this draft. I wonder if Weaver, you move back into the first round because now you get that 5th-year option. You get a little more control over a prospect if you draft him in the first, and maybe there's a team that's in some salary cap situation. They want to get out of a first round pick and into the second round. So I could see Troy doing that. Maybe he takes pick 31, packages it with something, gets him up to 20 or something like that, and we draft our guy Jordan Hawkins or something like that. We walk away with Brandon Miller, Jordan Hawkins. I would be in heaven. That would be a great Detroit Pistons draft for me.
Adding to that point, I think this is a draft where you could probably, like you always say, don't draft for fit. If you fall like outside the top 4 of this draft, like that's probably, you could probably draft for fit and upside at the same time at that point. Like at that point, it's more so, what do you value? Like, yeah, a Jordan Hawkins may not have the ceiling of a guy like an Ausar Thompson, but you just look at NBA role and what you need and think that their end outcomes probably are pretty similar. You could easily say, well, 5 to 6 pick, I'm just going to take Jordan Hawkins because this guy's probably 40% shooter for the next 10, 11 years and gives us a lot, which, you know, I know I'm setting myself up for like the Luke Kennard, Donovan Mitchell flashbacks for fans who are still scarred from that from 2017. But still, I think this is an interesting draft, and a lot of these debates will unfold over the next 2 months as we get past March Madness, get deeper into the combine and closer to the actual class, and get a better feel for what the Pistons' priorities are.
So real quick before we go, Omari, just one quick thought on the NCAA tournament this weekend of the Sweet 16, Elite 8. We saw Michigan State go down. We saw a bunch of upsets. Tennessee by Florida Atlantic, Bama, Houston, Marquise Noel, K-State got beat, but he was incredible, the 5'8" point guard. What's your one takeaway? We saw Princeton playing this weekend. One big takeaway from March Madness this weekend.
It's been crazy. I mean, even that Michigan State, Kansas State game, I heard you laugh when you said today. Like I
had a little tickle in my throat. It's early in the morning here on Sunday.
Whatever you say. I caught that, Bryce. I caught it. No, I would just say that I think this, like, the appeal of college basketball, I think in general, is just the chaos that you don't see in the NBA. You have a lot of players who may only be good at like 1 or 2 things by the time you get to the league. Everybody's good at everything, right? Like a full court press can completely destroy a college basketball team in a way you never see in the NBA. And I don't watch a lot of college basketball during the season up until March just because it's tough. But I love that aspect of college basketball, just that anything can happen. Madness, and this has been one of the craziest tournaments I've probably ever seen. Just looking at the seeding of teams. We talk about NBA parity. College basketball parity has been insane this year, where you have a 9 seed. And, you know, maybe they were underranked, but to get to the Final Four, like, pretty crazy. Michigan State, I couldn't even really be, like, just the outcome of that game. Some of the shots that Kansas State hit was just insane. Like, I know Izzo caught flack after for saying some of those shots were lucky, and as a coach, you probably shouldn't, say that about a team you just lost to. But even with that, some of the shots in that game were just insane. I mean, you know, players just playing their absolute hearts out, leaving it all on the floor. I think that's what really makes college basketball shine. And it's been a really fun, you know, tournament so far. You know, I hate that Bama and Houston played during that Pistons Raptors game last week, because like 95% of my TL is on a game that was way more fun. And then you have like you have me and then like the 5% of Pistons fans who were still watching the Pistons. I was going to tweet at people like, watch March Madness. This is once in a lifetime basketball. You can rewatch this Pistons game anytime. Just have fun with what we're seeing in this tournament, because this is certainly an all-timer, and it's just, I can't even tweet about my bracket. I don't see any more bracket tweets at this point, because everybody's bracket should be toast. I don't know anybody would have predicted this Final Four.
I'm like 99th percentile in mine. And it's
really? Okay.
And I'm shocked because I only have one Final Four team left, UConn, but I took them all the way to the national championship game. I did have them losing, but I think just because of that, I'm staying in it, which tells you how bad everybody else's bracket is, that I have one team in the Final Four, and just because of that, I'm staying alive. So everybody's is crushed. We knew this. It happens every single year. Speaking of watching the game, come watch the national championship game with us next Monday, April 3rd at the Hopcat Detroit Midtown. We're going to record at 8 p.m. Eastern. Then we're going to watch that national championship game at 9 p.m. Eastern. Omari, one of Florida Atlantic, San Diego State, or Creighton is going to be in that national championship game. Who would have thought this crazy? Creighton was a top 10 preseason team, struggled, but still, that's not a name you usually hear in the national championship. So come watch that game with us. We're going to have a lot of fun, great food, great environment, just have a great time talking Detroit Pistons, and then we can talk college hoops. But that will do it for this episode. Omari, take it away, my guy.
Yeah, can't wait to do next week's episode live with everybody. So talk to you all soon in person. Big thanks to our audio producer, Robin Chan, our executive producer, Anjanette Delgado, and our sports editor, Kirkland Crawford. Also, shout out to Wes Davenport, as always. We will talk to you all next week in Midtown Detroit at 8 p.m.